Sad news this morning. Phil Robertson, the patriarch of TV's Duck Dynasty, has died at the age of 79.
In the final months of Phil Robertson's life, everything slowed down. Behind closed doors, the Duck Dynasty patriarch was facing battles far bigger than controversy or fame. Battles his family knew they couldn't win. As his health faded, conversations inside the Robertson household shifted from business and legacy to comfort and time. Time they no longer had much of. But while Phil's body weakened, something else stood tall, something decades in the making. When news of his passing broke, many expected grief. What they didn't expect was the weight of what he left behind. Not just memories, not just beliefs, but a fortune so massive and so complicated that it left even his own family emotional. And the story behind it is far more surprising than anyone realizes. A reality show nobody saw coming. Phil Alexander Robertson was born on April 24, 1946, the fifth child of Merritt and James Robertson, in the small town of Vivian, Louisiana. He grew up in a home where money was scarce and comfort was a luxury. The family lived without electricity and rarely traveled into town. Most of what they ate came straight from their garden or from the land around them. By any modern standard, life was hard. But to Phil, it never felt that way. Those early years were filled with simplicity, self-reliance, and a sense of contentment that stayed with him for life. As a teenager, Phil showed a different side of himself. In high school, he was a standout athlete, earning all-state honors in football, baseball, and track. His talent opened doors, including a full scholarship to Louisiana Tech University in Ruston. There, he became the starting quarterback for the Bulldogs in the mid-1960s, even playing ahead of a future Pro Football Hall of Famer, Terry Bradshaw. It was a rare achievement, and many believed Phil was destined for football greatness. But while football was important to others, it never came first for Phil. Hunting did. Teammates noticed it immediately. He often showed up to practice straight from the woods, still carrying the signs of a morning hunt. Even Bradshaw later confirmed what everyone already knew. Phil loved hunting far more than he loved football. That devotion shaped every major decision he made. After college, Phil walked away from football completely. He even turned down a chance to try out for the Washington Redskins because it would have interfered with duck season. Teaching appealed to him for the same reason. Summers and holidays meant time outdoors, and that mattered more to him than titles or paychecks. For a while, Phil tried to live almost entirely off the land, pushing his lifestyle to the extreme. What once had been a necessity in his childhood became a deliberate choice. He pulled away from mainstream society, attempting to live like a man from another century, relying on hunting and fishing for survival, while the modern world rushed on around him. Over time, that passion crossed into recklessness, turning hunting into a competition where rules and limits were ignored. Despite this, Phil built a respectable career in education. With degrees in physical education and education, he spent years teaching, providing stability for his growing family. From the outside, life looked steady, but finances eventually tightened, and Phil needed another way to support those around him. That moment changed everything. Friends had long noticed his unique skill with duck calls. During hunting season, ducks seemed to respond to him in ways they did not to anyone else. Frustrated by the artificial calls on the market, Phil became convinced he could build something better, something real, something that actually sounded like a duck. In 1972, he put that belief to the test. Phil created his first duck call and began selling it under the name Duck Commander. The response was immediate. In the very first year, the calls brought in thousands of dollars, a clear sign that he was onto something. He patented the design and, just a year later, officially founded the Duck Commander Company. Now, like many small businesses in their earliest days, Duck Commander began at home. Phil Robertson turned his own house into the company's first factory, and the workforce was his family. Immediate and extended relatives worked side by side, assembling duck calls by hand, boxing them up, and sending them out as orders came in. It was a true family operation, built on long hours and shared effort. To sell his invention, Phil did things the hard way. He traveled from store to store, pitching his duck calls to shop owners who often turned him down. Rejection was common, and money was tight. To help make ends meet, his wife Kay and their children took on commercial fishing, doing whatever they could to keep food on the table and the business alive. Over time, persistence paid off. Hunters began to take notice, and the duck calls developed a loyal following. As demand grew, Duck Commander expanded beyond its original product. The company started producing instructional videos that taught duck hunting techniques and showcased hunts across different seasons. Those videos did more than sell gear. They introduced people to the Robertson family and their way of life. That exposure sparked something unexpected. Viewers became fascinated not just with hunting, but with the family behind it. The long beards, the unfiltered opinions, the rural lifestyle. It all felt different from anything else on television. The men's rugged appearance and unapologetic masculinity became part of the appeal, and curiosity around the Robertsons continued to grow. Eventually, Phil agreed to take part in a reality television series. Duck Dynasty premiered on Andy on March 21, 2012. The show centered on Phil, his wife Kay, their sons families, and Phil's younger brother, Cy, who quickly emerged as a fan favorite with his unpredictable humor and offbeat personality. From the very first trailer and pilot episode, the show made its tone clear. The family openly questioned modern food culture, criticized store-bought meat, and lamented what they saw as the decline of traditional cooking. To some viewers, these comments sounded almost ironic, like something out of a scripted comedy. But the Robertsons were not playing characters. They leaned fully into the image the show presented. While they were often labeled as simple backwoods people, the family embraced the redneck identity with pride, even if it was exaggerated for television. The network amplified that image, highlighting folksy sayings and turning Phil's one-liners into on-screen captions and catchphrases. That same voice carried over into books, cooking DVDs, and merchandise, all reinforcing a carefully shaped brand built around family, faith, and rural tradition. The audience responded immediately. In its first season, Duck Dynasty drew more than 2.5 million viewers, a strong showing that quickly turned into cultural buzz. By the second season, viewership nearly tripled, with close to 7 million people tuning in each week. The show was no longer just popular, it was becoming a phenomenon. In 2013, the third season pushed Duck Dynasty to new heights. Weekly viewership soared to around 12 million, making it one of the most-watched shows on cable television. With that kind of success came massive opportunities, and the entire Robertson family benefited. What started in a living room with handmade duck calls had grown into a national obsession and a multi-million-dollar empire. The moment controversy took over. For the Robertsons, religion is not a private detail tucked away from public life. It sits at the center of their worldview and often shapes their public statements, even when those statements ignite controversy. That dynamic became impossible to ignore in 2013, when Phil Robertson gave a wide-ranging interview to GQ magazine. What began as a behind-the-scenes look at the Duck Commander empire eventually turned toward religion and morality. When asked about sin, Robertson offered a sweeping answer rooted in his interpretation of the Bible. His remarks compared homosexuality to a range of behaviors he viewed as immoral, and he framed all of them as violations of God's law. At the same time, he insisted that judgment itself was not his role, emphasizing that he believed God alone would ultimately judge every person. The backlash was immediate and intense. While much of the public focus centered on his comments about gay people, the interview also included statements about race that drew equally sharp criticism. Reflecting on his childhood in Louisiana before the Civil Rights era, Robertson claimed he had never personally witnessed mistreatment of black people. He described growing up alongside black farm workers, portraying them as happy and content, and suggested that life before welfare and civil rights reforms was simpler and more harmonious. To many readers, this painted a deeply troubling and inaccurate picture of segregation-era America, minimizing both racism and systemic injustice. As criticism mounted, Robertson attempted to explain himself by saying he was a product of his time and that his main goal was to share his faith, not to insult or demean anyone. The explanation did little to calm the reaction. The interview was published on December 17th, and by the very next day, reports surfaced that Andy had suspended him indefinitely from Duck Dynasty. The suspension, however, turned out to be short-lived. After 9 days, the network reversed its decision. A.E. Andy released a statement saying Robertson's views did not align with the network's values of inclusion and respect. But it also stressed that Duck Dynasty was about family, not one individual's opinions. Within days, filming resumed with the entire Robertson family. In practical terms, the suspension had little lasting impact. This was not the first time Robertson's remarks had raised alarms. Years earlier, in a 2009 talk at a Georgia Sportsman Ministry event, he shared his views on marriage. The clip resurfaced in 2014 and quickly went viral. In it, Robertson argued that the ideal age for a woman to marry was 15 or 16, reasoning that younger brides were more practical and traditional. Although he mentioned parental involvement, his comments clashed sharply with modern views on consent, legality, and the realities of early marriage. Critics pointed to data showing high divorce rates among those who marry under 18, and in many places the practice he described would be illegal. Controversy followed him into his writing as well. While promoting his 2014 book Unfiltered, Robertson appeared on a radio show hosted by the Family Research Council. There, he suggested that AIDS and other sexually transmitted diseases were divine punishment for what he considered immoral sexual behavior. He argued that lifelong monogamous marriage between a man and a woman was the only truly safe path, and that illness was the result of stepping outside those boundaries. Public health experts and advocacy groups quickly condemned the remarks as harmful and misleading. In 2015, Robertson took the stage at the Conservative Political Action Conference. His speech drew loud applause from supporters, but also long moments of stunned silence. He made provocative religious claims, attacked societies he believed had rejected Christianity, and delivered a rambling message that critics described as incoherent. In the final portion of the speech, he grouped together Nazis, communists, ISIS, Islam, and various historical figures, claiming they all shared violence and conquest because they lacked Jesus. The comparisons sparked widespread outrage. That same year, Robertson delivered another controversial speech at a prayer breakfast in Vero Beach, Florida. There, he argued that morality comes only from God, and that atheists lacking belief in God have no true moral compass. To illustrate his point, he described a graphic and fictional scenario involving violent crimes against a family, implying that an atheist victim would not truly understand that such acts were wrong. The story horrified listeners and drew fierce condemnation from atheist groups who said it falsely portrayed non-believers as morally bankrupt. Robertson did not stop there. He expanded his criticism to liberals, accusing them of responsibility for the deaths of tens of millions of children, a figure he did not clearly explain. He framed political opponents as agents of evil and argued that guns and the Bible were the foundations of America's success, warning that liberals were trying to strip the nation of both. Rather than softening his rhetoric over time, Robertson continued to double down. In 2016, during an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, he defended his earlier statements, reaffirming his belief that any sex outside heterosexual marriage was sinful. He also spoke out against transgender bathroom policies, framing the issue as a matter of safety and common sense. Later that year, at a conservative summit in Denver, he linked rising crime rates to what he described as a moral collapse following the legalization of same-sex marriage. Throughout all of this, Robertson maintained that he did not hate gay people and that his words were misunderstood. From his perspective, he was offering spiritual guidance and trying to lead people toward Christianity. For critics, however, his repeated remarks crossed far beyond faith-based belief into rhetoric. They viewed as harmful, offensive, and deeply divisive. By that point, controversy had become inseparable from Phil Robertson's public image, standing in stark contrast to the family-centered, light-hearted tone that originally made Duck Dynasty a national hit. The dark years before redemption. For someone who would later become known for loud, uncompromising sermons about faith and morality, Phil Robertson's past tells a very different story. Long before the Bible verses, the public preaching, and the rigid rules he championed, his life was marked by chaos, contradiction, and darkness. It is a chapter that often sits uncomfortably beside the image he eventually presented to the world. Phil spoke often about traditional values, especially the idea that intimacy should exist only within marriage. Yet even his own family has acknowledged that reality didn't line up so neatly in the early years. Miss Kay once shared that their first son was born before they were legally married. They were young, deeply in love, and struggling financially. Their child arrived not long after they held a wedding ceremony, even though the marriage itself would not be legally finalized until several years later. Today, the family laughs about it, but it stands in sharp contrast to the message Phil later preached so publicly. At the time, Phil was playing college football at Louisiana Tech on a scholarship. According to Miss Kay, that period marked a noticeable shift in him. He began spending far more time with teammates than with his wife and young child. As his attention drifted away from home, the cracks in their relationship widened. Those cracks soon turned into something much more serious. Phil's drinking escalated, especially after the birth of their second son. Alcohol became a constant, and it opened the door to a string of destructive behaviors. He became involved with drugs, other women, and lived with little regard for consequences. Violence was not uncommon when he was intoxicated, and his reputation followed him. One night, things went so far that he physically assaulted people inside a bar, including the owners. The incident was serious enough that charges could have followed. Miss Kay stepped in, persuading the owners not to press charges, while Phil hid in the woods to avoid the authorities. It was a frightening time, and Miss Kay later admitted that his drinking terrified her. She also knew he was being unfaithful. Even when someone attempted to talk to Phil about faith and introduce him to Christianity, he rejected it outright. By his own admission, he drove the person away. Meanwhile, the family continued to grow, and the situation at home continued to deteriorate. Miss Kay later described this period simply as dark. Phil's drinking repeatedly landed him in trouble with the law, and his behavior became so unrecognizable that she once told her children that what they were seeing was not their father, but something far worse, consuming him. Her life during those years was marked by fear, exhaustion, and emotional isolation. She later opened up about this painful chapter in her book, The Women of Duck Dynasty, revealing just how close she came to breaking completely. She wrote about hitting rock bottom, realizing she could not fix her life or her marriage on her own, and feeling so overwhelmed that she simply wanted everything to stop. She made it clear she did not want to die, but desperately wanted rest from the pain. Despite all of this, Miss Kay has said that the worst advice she received during that time was being told to leave her husband. It is a perspective that continues to spark debate, but it reflects the depth of her commitment and the complicated reality she was living in. Phil, meanwhile, reached a breaking point of his own. At his lowest, he admitted that he kicked his wife and children out of the house and began searching for a way to end his life. 3 months later, everything changed. Miss Kay encountered him in the parking lot of her office building, and what she saw stunned her. For the first time, the tough, unshakable man she had known was broken. He could not eat, could not sleep, and could not function. All he wanted, he told her, was his family back. That moment became the turning point. With Miss Kay's forgiveness and support, Phil confessed his sins to a local preacher, was baptized, and soon found himself teaching at a Christian school. The man who had once run from faith now embraced it completely. Phil Robertson from Duck Dynasty leaves a fortune that makes his family cry. In early December 2024, Phil Robertson's son Jace went on the Unashamed with the Robertson Family podcast and shared a health update that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. The biggest revelation was that Phil had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's disease. But that wasn't the only battle he was facing. Jace also explained that his father had been dealing with a serious, still undiagnosed blood disease that had been causing ongoing complications for years and had recently gotten much worse. According to Jace, the family and their doctors had spent a long time trying to understand exactly what it was. But all the medical teams involved had reached the same conclusion. Whatever Phil had, there was no cure. That reality hit hard. Despite being in the early stages of Alzheimer's and living with constant physical pain, Phil still wanted to stay connected to the podcast. He missed it. He missed the conversations. He missed being part of something familiar. But the truth was that his condition had already taken a heavy toll. His pain had become so intense that he struggled to walk, and his memory was no longer reliable. Jace explained that some days were better than others, but even on the better days, Phil found it difficult just to sit down and hold a normal conversation. So the family shifted their focus. Instead of fighting for a cure that didn't exist, they focused on comfort, on managing his pain, on trying to slow the progression of the disease as much as possible, on making his days gentler and more bearable than the ones before. For many people, the news of Phil Robertson facing Alzheimer's felt like a shock. But when placed against the broader history of the Robertson family, it became part of a much longer story, filled with hardship, controversy, and pain. The Duck Dynasty story had always been more complicated than it looked on television. Behind the beards, the jokes, and the faith-based branding was a family history shaped by abuse, addiction, violence, and deep emotional wounds. By the time this health crisis arrived, the Robertsons were already outsiders in much of mainstream entertainment. Their open political positions and Phil's past public statements had made him especially controversial, even despised in many circles. His rhetoric over the years had been widely criticized as hateful and harmful, especially toward LGBTQ people, Muslims, and other marginalized groups. That legacy complicated how the public received the news of his illness. It created a strange tension between empathy for a man who was suffering and anger over the harm he had caused. Inside the family, though, the focus was different. Phil's son Al reflected on his father's condition by comparing it to how Ronald Reagan handled his own Alzheimer's diagnosis. He spoke about how Reagan stepped back from public life once he realized he could no longer function the way he used to, and how that decision became a kind of quiet, dignified goodbye. Al suggested that Phil hadn't written a formal letter like Reagan did, but in his view, his father's message lived on through the family itself, through their faith, through the stories they continued to tell, through the way they believed his influence would move forward from one generation to the next. By January 2025, it was becoming clear that Phil Robertson's health was continuing to decline. His son Jace shared that Phil had fractured additional vertebrae in his back, complications that stemmed from the serious accident he suffered in 2023 while loading an aluminum boat. Speaking candidly on the Unashamed podcast, Jace explained that his father was dealing with multiple conditions, and, despite time passing, there were no real signs of improvement. By April, the family's priorities had shifted in a very real and sobering way. The focus was no longer on recovery, but on comfort. During an episode of Unashamed with the Robertson family, Jace offered a difficult but honest update, one that was later highlighted by Taste of Country. He admitted that things had not been going well. When people asked how his parents were doing, both Phil and Miss Kay, he felt there was no point in sugarcoating the truth. They were not doing well, The family was doing everything they could to keep them comfortable and cared for, taking things one day at a time. There was, however, a small bit of hope tucked into that update. Miss Kay had begun to show signs of improvement after a recent hospital stay. Jace shared that the week leading up to the podcast had been noticeably better for her. She had been in serious condition after suffering an infection caused by a fall and a cut that occurred earlier. While she remained hospitalized at the time, her care had shifted toward rehabilitation, physical therapy, and simply getting her strength back, including encouraging her to eat again. Still, the fear the family had been living with was unmistakable. Jace openly admitted just how close things had felt to the end. There were moments when it truly seemed like they were preparing themselves for the worst. It was an incredibly heavy and emotional period, filled with uncertainty and quiet goodbyes that no family is ever ready for. In May, Willie Robertson also spoke publicly about what the family was going through. He explained that their mindset had changed. Every moment with Phil had become precious, something to be protected and appreciated. They were no longer taking time for granted. Willie talked about how those simple, ordinary moments now carried extraordinary meaning. A Saturday spent fishing together, having everyone in one place. Small gatherings that, in the past, might have felt routine, now felt sacred. He reflected on how easy it is for people to overlook those moments while chasing busy schedules and everyday distractions. But watching someone reach the later stages of life, especially when they are no longer able to fully communicate or engage the way they once did, changes everything. Those quiet moments become the ones that matter most. The lesson, Willie explained, was to slow down, be present, and truly live in those small moments, instead of constantly running after the next thing. Not long after, the world learned that Phil Robertson had passed away at the age of 79. Known to millions as the bearded, camouflage-wearing patriarch of Duck Dynasty, Phil had become an unlikely reality television icon. The news was confirmed by his son Willie and daughter-in-law Corey in a joint Instagram post shared on Sunday, May 25th. The entire Robertson family released a statement together, celebrating Phil's life, rather than focusing solely on the loss. They shared that their father, husband, and grandfather was now with the Lord, and they thanked the countless people whose lives had been touched by his faith, his story, and his desire to share his beliefs with anyone willing to listen. They expressed deep gratitude for his life on earth, and made it clear they intended to carry forward his legacy of faith, love for God, and love for others. For the time being, the family chose to keep services private, holding an intimate gathering to honor him. They did note that a public celebration of life would be planned later, giving fans and supporters a chance to pay tribute to the man who left such a lasting mark. As news of his passing spread, many began wondering about Phil Robertson's net worth, especially after the health struggles he had endured in his final years. The story behind his wealth, however, was decades in the making and rooted in persistence rather than instant success. Phil was instrumental in founding the Duck Commander brand, beginning with something as simple as handmade duck calls.
It's a long way off a duck when you hear an old hen duck that goes.
According to ABC News, he started carving his own calls because he believed they worked better than anything available in stores. That belief became the foundation of a business that would eventually explode into a massive empire. A&E's biography of the family confirms that Duck Commander officially began in 1973. In those early years, Phil personally worked to convince retailers to carry his product. Success did not come quickly. In the first year, after focusing entirely on handcrafted calls, the business brought in just $8,000. It was modest, slow, and far from glamorous. Over time, though, Duck Commander gained momentum. Phil's dedication paid off, and by the time Duck Dynasty premiered, the company had secured contracts with major outdoor retailers across the country. Willie Robertson joined the business early, starting in sales before rising to president and eventually CEO. In 2006, He also launched Buck Commander, a hunting DVD and gear company inspired by his passion for deer hunting. Remarkably, even before Duck Dynasty ever aired, the family business was already valued in the millions. Everything changed in March 2012 when Duck Dynasty debuted on Andy. The show didn't just boost the brand, it transformed the entire Robertson family into household names. By the end of 2013, Duck Commander's revenues had skyrocketed, largely driven by product tie-ins connected to the show. That year alone, the company generated an estimated $400 million in revenue, with roughly half coming from Walmart. The family capitalized on their fame, launching countless licensing deals. Clothing, books, greeting cards, and branded outdoor gear flooded the market. Each new product added another layer to the family's growing financial success and further cemented the Robertson name as a brand. Phil himself remained the face of it all. His life story was even adapted into a feature film, The Blind, released in 2023. At the time of his passing, his estimated net worth stood at around $10 million. While that figure alone represents significant success, it only tells part of the story. Phil's true legacy may be the foundation he built for his family. His wife, Kay, is estimated to have a net worth of $15 million. His son, Alan, has an estimated $3 million. Willie, the most recognizable face of the family, is estimated at $45 million, while his wife, Corey, is close behind at $40 million. Sadie Robertson holds an estimated $1 million. Jace Robertson is estimated at $8 million, with his wife sharing a similar figure. Even Uncle Cy Robertson has an estimated net worth of $8 million. When looking at the bigger picture, it becomes clear that Phil Robertson's impact extended far beyond television fame or personal wealth. His hard work, vision, and persistence laid the groundwork for a family legacy that will continue for generations, both financially and personally.